Hello and welcome to Hammer Time, a Hammer horror podcast, part of the Evolution of Horror Network. I'm Becky Darke, a film critic and Hammer newbie, and I'm joined by my co-host, human encyclopedia of film and TV and Hammer expert, Kevin Lyons.
Hello.
Hi Kev.
Nice to be finally starting now, finally getting into the meat of it now with our first film, isn't it?
I know, it's really exciting, and no spoilers, but thank goodness I really loved it.
Yes. we were saying off microphone earlier, wouldn't it have been really awkward if Becky had hated this film, because I love it, and it would have been an hour of us sitting here looking daggers at each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Very frosty atmosphere.
Yeah, a pod friendship quickly cancelled. In this podcast, Kevin and I will be watching and discussing every horror film in Hammer's back catalogue, and this week we go back to where it all began, 1955's The Quatermass Experiment.
3 men went into outer space. Only one of them came back a strange, distorted creature, haunted and possessed by something beyond human understanding.
So, Kev, remind us, what was the state of Hammer films before the Quatermass Experiment? So before we actually get into the meat of chatting about the film, let's have a bit of a previously on Hammer Time.
Well, they were in pretty good shape, I think. If my maths is correct, and anybody who knows me will be able to tell you that maths is not my strong point, I think that this is film number 57, feature film 57. So they'd made 56 films prior to this. They'd been making B-movies, support films, a lot of films for the quota quickie market, you know, the films that were required to flesh out double bills with a British film.
Right.
And so they'd been doing quite well. They'd sort of not quite cornered the market. There were other people doing it, but they were making some neat little thrillers and crime films. They'd done some science fiction films a couple of years earlier than this. So they dabbled in the waters a little bit, but they were doing quite well, but this was going to change everything.
So tell us a bit about the development of this movie, a bit about kind of why did they decide to pick up on the Quatermass Experiment as a story, and the kind of the sort of initial production.
Well, it dates back to August 1953 when the television series by Nigel Neal, also called The Quatermass Experiment, that had just ended.
Right.
Anthony Hines, who was one of the producers at Hammer, had, like an awful lot of people in this country, been absolutely hooked on the series. And he persuaded managing director James Carreras that he should be watching it, so he came in later episodes. And Anthony Hines just loved it and could see the potential straight away for making a film. But Nigel Neal had sort of bugged the BBC to sell the film right, but to farm it out, to try other people to see if they were interested. Hammer approached the BBC and said, yes, we want to do this. But the BBC shopped it around to people. They're big names, big British film names like the Bolting brothers, they took it to. They took it to Frank Launder and Sidney Gilliatt. You know, there's titans of British cinema. And Gilliatt in particular was very interested in making the film, but he balked at the idea that it was inevitably going to have an X certificate. And Hammer, on the other hand, they pounced on that as an idea. They thought, well, this is an even bigger draw that we're going to have an X certificate film. But it could have all been so different, couldn't it? If Launder and Gilliatt had made the film, I'm sure it would have been a really good film. They were great filmmakers. But would we be sitting here doing this podcast all these decades later on Hammer films had they not made The Quatermass Experiment?
Right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
One of those many alternate dimensions that I like to think about. You know, there is a very strange one where Hammer didn't do the Quatermass Experiment, and who knows what that world looks like. I don't want to find out.
I don't want to find out. Yeah, one of those odd kind of cinematic sliding door moments that
That's
it's just
it. Yeah.
One other kind of decision had been made, or one other person had said yes or no at the wrong time in the wrong meeting. We wouldn't be here right now, and we wouldn't have all these brilliant films.
Exactly. But, you know, the BBC themselves, they weren't entirely sure that Hammer were the right people to make this, which is odd because they'd done an awful lot of work with Hammer in the past. Hammer had been adapting BBC radio dramas for a very long time. They'd done things like the Dick Barton trilogy. The Adventures of PC-49, there was a sequel to that, A Case for PC-49, Dr. Morell, The Case of the Missing Heiress, Celia, Meet Simon Cherry, The Man in Black. These were all based on hit BBC
They're
radio.
all fantastic titles.
They're great titles. They're very evocative, aren't they? And sort of, they weren't horror films. Man in Black we might make a borderline case for, but not really. But they'd had this relationship, and it was very odd that the BBC initially were a bit reluctant, but they gave in eventually, and for a sort of down payment of £500, Hammer were allowed to buy the script, buy the rights to it. And to get it off the ground, basically, as Hammer did, I think I mentioned this last week, that Hammer have got this history for a long time of jumping into bed with American partners because they needed to get the money. And in this particular instance, it was the Lippert Company in America, Robert Lippert, and he came on board. He brought in his own writer, Richard Landau. They hired Val Guest to direct it, and that was it. They were off and running. We'll talk about these people, I'm sure, a little bit later as we go along.
Yeah.
But it was kind of almost a surefire money winner for Hammer. Quatermass had been huge on television. Huge. Not quite as huge as some of the legends would have you believe. There was all this talk of, how it practically brought Britain to a standstill. The pubs emptied and the streets cleared. I did a bit of digging around. They've got an average of 3.9 million viewers per episode, which is about 10% of the population at the time. But that was still huge compared to what was on television in 1953.
Right.
So it's a huge hit. People knew the name Quatermass in this country. We'll come to the American problem later on. But in this country, they knew Quatermass. So it was a no-brainer. They could make this film and they were going to make their money back no matter what.
So the plot of the movie, I've pulled this from Letterboxd.
Yeah.
The first manned spacecraft, fired from an English launch pad, is first lost from radar, then roars back to Earth and crashes in a farmer's field, and is found to contain only one of the 3 men who took off in it. And he is unable to talk, but appears to be undergoing a torturous physical and mental metamorphosis. So how does that differ, Kev, from the plot or the storyline of the BBC TV serial from earlier in the decade?
Well, it kind of hits all the major beats of the TV series. It doesn't take anything away significantly. I think some Nigel Neal fans might disagree, but I think it hits all the serious bits we need. There are things like Karoon, the surviving astronaut, as he's changing into this horrific monster, he does meet other people along the way. He meets more people along the way than he does in the film. There are minor details like the little girl, we'll talk about the little girl later on, that Karoon meets, is a little boy on television.
Okay.
And the ending is significantly different. But I'm going to discuss that when we discuss the star of the film, because I think it's relevant they couldn't have done it any other way with the star they were stuck with, basically.
Interesting. They were stuck with. All right, I am interested to hear more about this.
Well, that's probably overselling it a bit, but we'll come to that in a moment anyway. But I think Richard Landau and Val Guest, who also rewrote parts of the script, I think they did quite a good job of actually bringing down 6 hours of very densely written, very adult, very mature science fiction into less than 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really... I'm saying this, we've only got 2 episodes of the original series to judge this by, plus synopses and camera scripts. But from what I can tell from those camera scripts and the synopses, we're not losing anything fundamental to the story. We're losing a lot of texture, a lot of detail, but I think the film makes up for that in other ways.
Amazing. So you mentioned Nigel Neal just now.
Yeah.
Can you just tell our listeners, anybody who isn't familiar with the name, who is Nigel Neal and why was he kind of so important to British sci-fi and horror of this era?
Nigel Neal, he was a key figure in British horror and science fiction television, and television in general. In fact, in The Guardian in 2006, shortly after he died, Mark Gatiss, who had just worked on a remake of the Quatermass Experiment, he wrote that Neal can lay claim to having invented popular TV. There was nothing quite like the Quatermass Experiment before. There had been television, course they had. But this was something where people were talking about it. They, you know, those people who did leave the pub to come home and watch it, they went back to the pub to talk about this incredible programme they were seeing. It became, I think, what they call water cooler programme.
I was just about to ask, did they have water coolers in 1953? I'm not sure they did.
They had taps.
Yeah, okay. Well, everybody was gathered around their taps. They're cold water taps.
Yeah. And they were talking about the Quatermass Experiment because it was unlike anything we'd seen on, even I wasn't born then, but unlike anything that British viewers had seen at the time. And because of that, he rather got tagged as a science fiction writer. And to be fair, he was undoubtedly a genius, Nigel Neal, but he was a proper old curmudgeon at times, and he really hated being called a science fiction writer.
Okay.
Absolutely hated it. And of course he did. He wrote so much other stuff as well, but it's the science fiction and horror that we remember him for. And let's face it, he created some of the best of genre television produced anywhere, as well as Quatermass. Bear with me, I'm going to reel off a list here. This is just a list of some of the most amazing television ever produced in this country. There was a play called The Creature, about the Yeti, which would be turned into The Abominable Snowman by Hammer. We'll get to that in due course. He'd written a hugely controversial 1954 version of 1984, which had starred Peter Cushing. We may mention him once or twice. And there was the lost nuclear ghost story, The Road, in 1963. He adapted Nora Lott's novel, The Devil's Own, into The Witches for Hammer in 1966. The year of the Sex Olympics in 1968. Uncannily.
Sorry, Kevin, the what?
The year of the Sex Olympics. Yeah, you heard me. You heard me the first time. The year of the Sex Olympics, which, despite that title, is actually an incredibly serious piece of work and uncannily anticipated reality television. If you ever watch it, I think it was Mark Gatiss again in that article that when he saw Big Brother, the first series of Big Brother, he was shouting at the television, "Stop, have you not seen the year of the Sex Olympics? Nigel Neal was warning us." And so, he did that. He did all sorts of bonkers stuff. There was a tale of a haunted motorcycle, The Chopper.
Sounds incredible.
For Out of the Unknown. There was the Stone Tape, of course. We all know the Stone Tape.
Of course.
He did some folk horror with a television episode called Murren in 1975. That led him to do Beasts in 1976. There was a Last Quatermass serial in 1979, a science fiction sitcom in 1981 called Kinvig. Less said about that, the better, maybe. And, of course, there was the adaptation of The Woman in Black in 1989. I mean, that's a list of achievements that half a dozen writers would have been happy to have at least one of.
Yeah.
And he did them all. So this man was a giant in a genre that he didn't really want to be associated with. He was often vocally very dismissive of things like, breaks my heart to say this because I love Nigel Neal, but he was very dismissive of Doctor Who. He didn't like Doomwatch, and he particularly hated Blake's Seven.
Oh,
he called that one paralytically awful. The dialogue characterisation seems to consist of a kind of childish squabbling.
Oh, Nigel, you old grump.
He's an old grump, but let's face it, this man created Quatermass, The Stone Tape, The Woman in Black, all of that stuff. He could be as grumpy as he wants to be, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
the man was
fair
a
enough.
genius. And with genius, you do often get that kind of eccentricity. But it's well-deserved, well-earned in his case.
So, to give some wider historical context, we're going to do a little feature on each episode of this podcast where we're going to take a look at what was going on in the world, mainly the UK, at the time of the film we're covering, that it was released. So events, pop culture, other horror films, etc. So here is my first instalment of Hammer in History.
Hammer in History.
Our producer Mike told me that I should only do 2 or 3 facts max for these, but I've ignored him for 1955 because there is too much interesting stuff, Kev.
Of course.
Wait till you hear some of this. So just to place us politically, in 1955, our Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, resigned due to ill health. He was 80 and he was replaced by Anthony Eden, who then went on to step down less than 2 years later for massively fluffing the Suez Crisis. So that's kind of who's in power at the time of the Quatermass Experiment being released. So obviously this is a sci-fi horror film, and we're going to come on to talk a lot about the kind of sci-fi in the film itself. But in real science, in 1955, Christopher Cockerell had just patented his design of the hovercraft, which I know you don't really get hovercrafts that much anymore. But I feel like when I was a kid, hovercrafts were quite the thing.
I went on one once. I can see why they're not around anymore.
Sure. Was it terrifying?
They were a bit scary, to say the least.
Yeah. They always looked terrifying when you saw them on shows like Blue Peter and stuff. I was like, yes, I'm okay, actually. Thank you.
They were great in Bond films and Doctor Who, but not to go backwards and forwards between the mainland and the Isle of Wight, which is what I lived for a while. No. I'd use the boat, thank you.
The UK's first atomic bomber unit was formed, flying the high-altitude jet bombers Vickers Valiants out of RAF Gaydon in Warwickshire. An RAF English electric Canberra jet bomber set a new world altitude record of nearly 66,000 feet. There were 3 tragic but totally unrelated jet fighter crashes on the same day. A Gloucester Meteor crashed on takeoff, killing both crew and 2 fruit pickers on the ground. And 2 Hawker Seahawk jet fighters independently crashed into the North Sea. All on the same day, all completely unrelated. I blame aliens. And also, this is a weird one. In 1955, 2 RAF Avro Shackleton maritime patrol aircraft disappeared without trace during a routine patrol.
Spooky.
So lots of stuff kind of sciencey there, but let's look a little bit at pop culture. I'm just going to go through a few little bits and pieces that are kind of vaguely related or of interest. So the Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act came into effect with the intention of protecting children from horror comics. Richard Baker and Kenneth Kendall became the first BBC television newsreaders to be seen reading the news on camera. And I thought that was really interesting, considering what we see in the Quatermass Experiment around the kind of news reports and what we see in the
indeed, yes,
kind of denouement at Westminster Abbey.
Yeah.
John Wyndham's science fiction novel The Chrysalids was released in 1955. And the most notable UK number one, this isn't really related at all to the film, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because it's a banger. The most notable UK number one of 1955, to my mind, was Rosemary Clooney's Mambo Italiano.
Oh, right, yes.
Love it.
Yes. Excellent.
So elsewhere in cinema, 2 classic horror films, Lady Abelique and The Night of the Hunter, were both released this same year, as were The Dam Busters, the animation of George Orwell's Animal Farm, and the Ealing comedy The Lady Killers. So a year of classics.
Indeed, yes. And further proof of the notion that no science fiction is written in a vacuum.
Quite right.
That it always comes out of something that's going on in the real world. It always reflects real world concerns. And so all that stuff about nuclear bombers and all the rest of it,
yep,
that would have been on the mind of, even a couple of years earlier, that would have been on Nigel Neal's mind. It certainly would have been on Hammer's mind. It was on everybody's mind at the time. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, back to the film. Kev, what do we think of it? What do we think of 1955's The Quatermass Experiment? How was it for you on this rewatch? And did it kind of change at all for you watching it with a kind of focus, I guess, knowing that we were going to be recording a podcast episode about it?
I'd like to say yes, because that would make me sound very professional, but no, because the film is so engrossing.
Yeah.
That it's, you sit there with your notepad, prepared to make all sorts of notes, and after the first 10 minutes or so, you're just so engrossed in the story.
Yeah.
And it has never let me down. Every time I've watched it, it's still as terrific as it was the first time I saw it.
How many times do you think you've seen it now?
Oh my God. I don't even want to think about that, to be honest. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot. It's a film that I go back to quite often because it has its flaws, which we'll come to, but I still think it's one of, as a start for Hammer down this particular road, they couldn't have really done any better, I don't think. It is extraordinary. It's a terrific film. And it just never gets old for me. I was thinking, funny enough, last night, I was thinking about the 2005 remake of it that the BBC did. And I thought, could they remake it today? And I thought, yes, of course they could. They could remake this film today because the story still works. There's nothing in the story that's dated in the slightest bit. And that, again, was part of the genius of Nigel Neal, that he could write these stories which were quite literally timeless.
Wow. Yeah, you're so right, actually. And you said a couple of things there, Kev, that I really want to sort of pick up on and echo. Firstly is, as I said at the beginning of the episode, I am very happy to say that I loved this film.
Great.
And what you said about it being engrossing is absolutely right. And I think that, I don't know, older films, especially kind of black and white, when I was kind of growing up, and I wonder if this is the same now, you know, these are the sorts of films that I didn't necessarily avoid, but I wouldn't be particularly drawn to, because I'd sort of think, oh, you know, they're going to be dated or they're not going to look that great in black and white. I was just in from almost like just the opening moments of it, where you're sort of following that sort of cute young couple yes. playing sort of chase me through the fields, and then it's just immediately you hear that kind of cacophonous noise of the rocket coming down, and I was just immediately in the farmhouse kind of falling in. It's so immediate that you are plunged into the action. And then the film just has such a kind of richness of characters and dialogue that I was like, I can't put my attention elsewhere, because I just felt like I was going to miss something.
Sure.
And I really love that with a film. I love it that there aren't these kinds of lulls or what feels like kind of filler or anything like that. Like, it felt really meaty and engrossing from the get-go, which I loved.
Like I said, they managed to strip down 6 hours of television into this lightning-paced thriller. And in fact, I read somewhere the other day, and they were quite right, I double-checked it, that the first 2 minutes of the film covers half of the first episode.
What?
On television.
That's
they just get it over and done with. If you watch the first 2 episodes do survive. If you watch, there's an awful lot of Quatermass and his team sitting around in a control room trying to track where the spaceship is. And it's really good stuff. But in terms of a film, they didn't need it. Let's just get it crashed now. We'll talk about how it got there in a minute. And they kind of fill in the backstory in the car ride.
That's right. That's right. When they're sort of saying, you know, that it's been missing for 57 days or however long it is.
That's it. Yeah,
but again, they're not labouring on it, are they? It's not lots of men sort of sitting around in labs chatting about the intricacies of having lost a spacecraft.
Sure.
It's these very sort of quite quick, not quite sort of hard boiled, but these just very sort of economical lines that give you just what you need to kind of flesh out the story.
One of the hallmarks of Val Guest as a director, if you watch this, or we'll talk about Quatermass 2 in a few weeks' time, or The Day the Earth Caught Fire, or a brilliant film called 80,000 Suspects, he had an almost documentary-like way of shooting these films. So you have people with overlapping dialogue, which was quite unusual back then. You know, you'd have people in the background talking on a radio while Quatermass is talking to one of his sidekicks about something else in the foreground. And so he's got that sort of immediacy to it, a kind of you are there sort of feel. Yeah. Which I think it helped a lot of people at the time who weren't really into science fiction and horror. The fact that it was done in a very sort of, pardon the pun, down-to-earth kind of way, I think that really helped them get over the sort of fancifulness of the storyline. Yeah, definitely. And you get those sort of nice moments in those opening scenes between, say, the policemen. They're kind of having a chat and sort of taking the mick out of each other a bit for chasing after girls. And there's an incredible line from one of them that says, you'd think it was a bank holiday, the way they come flocking out. Yes. I'm like, I'm sorry, in 1955, was that when
Was that when was bank holidays when all the women would sort of put on their
Sunday best and go out to watch a crashed spaceship?
Exactly, poke their heads out the front doors and see what sci-fi goings on is happening on the farm down the road.
I think we can sort of see the division of labour with the two screenwriters. When you were saying earlier, the sort of fast-paced, sort of hard-boiled dialogue, that's Richard Landau, that's the American guy. And I think when you've got the funnier bits, that's Val Guest.
That's really interesting.
You get all those, those throwaway little lines like that, and all the lovely bits of business with Jack Warner as Inspector Lomax.
Oh, he's great.
Who's not exactly the comic relief, but he's the kind of light-hearted strand.
He is,
that runs through it. Or that thing about him trying to have a shave.
Oh my God.
All the way through the film. He never quite gets to have the shave that he wants.
It's so funny.
That's so Val Guest. He would have... I can't remember now if that's in the TV series or not, but he would have seen that if it was and pulled that to the forefront.
Right.
Just to have that little bit of very, very quirky, very English sense of humour.
Absolutely.
Up front, which again grounds it in the real world. This feels like it's happening just down the road from wherever you happen to be living in the UK.
It really does. And I think that ties it to things like War of the Worlds, which, when I was a kid, I used to watch things like... God, what was it called? Tripods?
Oh, Tripods, yes.
I loved Tripods. I used to watch all the reruns of that. But I grew up just down the road from Woking, which is obviously where War of the Worlds, and there is a tripod kind of in the centre of the town to market. And, I also, like, The Omen is my favourite horror film of all time, and that has scenes that were filmed in Guildford, just up the road. There's a road name that is mentioned over a police radio at one point, which is the road that I used to drive up to go to my nan's house every weekend. Yeah. And there are those, you're right, like there is something about kind of anchoring it in that everyday feeling that I think you're right. It will have made it much more accessible for the audience who maybe were a little sceptical about kind of a high sci-fi film.
Exactly. Yeah, it felt more like a good English drama.
Yeah,
that just happened to have an invading alien in it. And so it kind of helped people over that little hump. I think they weren't quite ready for it yet. But this is what helped them through it, I reckon. There's
another really lovely line at one point. I think it's when they find the poor chemist who has been offed by Caroon. And one of the coppers says, there are no witnesses. They were all at church or in the local. Which I love those for your two options,
It couldn't be more English than at that moment, could it?
Exactly.
If they weren't witnessing a horrific murder in a chemist, they were at the pub or they were on their knees in church.
Yeah.
There was no other option in 1955. And there wasn't, because, we're pre-teenager here, so all the young people, they were sort of going from school to adults straight away. So there were no nightclubs, they were in London, I suppose, in Manchester and places, but most of the people watching this would not have been to a nightclub because there wouldn't have been in one in their small town. And if there was, it was seen as being a bit sleazy.
Your parents maybe didn't let you go.
Exactly. So you went to the pub. Working class people went to the pub, or you went to the church if you were a believer. And that's what you did. So it's a lovely line. You're absolutely right. It's very, very perceptive, I think, of British life at that time.
And I thought it was really funny what you said about the Quatermass TV show and how you said, these rumours of people sort of leaving the pub to go home to watch it. And then I was like, and how weird that had been sort of picked up in the film.
Yes.
But rather than not leaving the pub to go and witness a murder in a chemist, they weren't leaving the pub to go and watch this TV show.
Indeed. And in fact, in Val Guest's The Day the Earth Caught Fire, there's a lovely scene in a bar where they're sort of trying to watch the news of, this catastrophe that's befalling them, and the weather conditions are causing the signal to drop out. And someone actually says, no one believes anything unless they see it on television. And, that was in 1963, so Val Guest was well aware of the rise of television at this point.
Yeah.
So
let's talk a little bit about the experiment in the title.
Yes.
Conspicuously missing an E.
It is.
Why is it spelled like this, Kev?
Because it got an X certificate. And in fact, I think it was the 8th film to get an X certificate. It had only just been introduced. For our American listeners, an X certificate in Britain is not the same as an X certificate in America. Okay? X certificate in America usually meant films of specialist gentleman's entertainment, shall we say. And that's not what it meant here. It meant that you couldn't see the film over a certain age.
Right.
18 was the age for the X certificate. And of course, that's what Hammer were looking for. They were looking for this, targeting this demographic of a more mature and what they thought of as a more sophisticated audience for this kind of film. When they knew they definitely got an X rating, of course they changed the title to Xperiment. And I think there were things like, on the poster tags, there were experience the excitement. And, they really laboured the points. They really sort of hammered it home. But I think it's fantastic because it differentiates it, especially for those of us who are sort of filmographers by inclination. It really helps to differentiate it between that and the television series. So, it's kind of useful for that. But it recognised, I think, that there was an adult audience for this sort of thing. Screen science fiction at this point from America was becoming increasingly juvenile.
Oh, interesting.
It's been increasingly aimed at teenage markets. And so Hammer was sort of like saying, no, let's take this back. This is proper. This is proper science fiction. It's proper horror. Let's aim it at adults. And so they put it right there in the title to make sure you didn't miss it.
And do you think for the audience, would adult viewers have kind of seen it as a bit of a badge of honour, kind of having that X certificate on the film?
Oh, yeah. If you were just turned 18, or if you were like me, sort of 15, 16 and 6'6", it really was a badge of honour to get into an X or later 18 certificate film, because I'm a grown-up, I'm a hard man now, I've been to see an X film, and God, no, I remember that, going to see things like, the Confessions films and thinking that was it, hardcore pornography. I'm a man, and it's like, oh, how little did I know? I was so naive. But yeah, sort of that it was a badge of honour, I think, especially for teenagers, to be able to get into an X certificate film. It meant something. It meant that you were going to see something a bit different. Yeah. Something a bit special. This wasn't your Commodore Garden, so this wasn't your Disney films. This wasn't even a carry-on film. Much as I adore carry-on films, they were much more naive, perhaps, in talking about sex than the X certificate would have suggested. This was proper hard stuff for grown-ups. And so particularly for teenagers, and particularly for teenage boys, because we are, as a species, bloody idiots, we did actually think that this was really something special. It was up there with having 8 pints on a Saturday night. No one knew why you had 8 pints on a Saturday night. It was just a ritual that you went through, and nobody could really understand why they were trying to get in to see X certificate films. It's just you had to do it because your mates were doing it.
Yeah.
And it did. It became a badge of honour to be able to get in and see an X certificate film. The fact that you got into this X certificate film as sort of a bloody good film was just the icing on the cake, really.
Yeah. So you're sort of talking about the X certificate giving films this sort of extra special something. But with the Quatermass Xperiment for Hammer, did it have kind of typical elements that we come on to see later on? Are we seeing big Hammer main players with directors, crew, cast, that kind of thing?
Well, I said last week that I sort of argue that there is no typical Hammer film. If we think of Hammer, we might think, yes, the Gothics. That's what we might think of straight away. This is nothing like that. This is nothing like the Gothics at all. Black and white, cerebral science fiction, set in the modern day, nothing like that at all. But it does have quite a few crew members who were going to turn up time and time again. Val Guest made 3 more films for Hammer, Quatermass 2, Abominable Snowman, and later on When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. Anthony Hines was the producer. We mentioned him last week. He was the son of William Hines, who was the founder of Hammer Films. Ada Young, second assistant director on this film, went on to be a producer for Hammer. The wonderful Renee Glynn was the continuity person on this. Camera operator Len Harris, editor James Needs, James Bernard, the composer. We're going to hear a lot from him in future. Phil Leakey did the makeup, and in a couple of years' time, he'd do Frankenstein's monster.
Oh, wow.
For the Curse of Frankenstein. Okay. Les Bowie did the special effects. J. Elder Wills was the art director. So, yeah, the core team that we think of with the Gothics isn't quite in place yet. They were off doing other things. But a lot of these guys would keep coming back. And, the people were quite loyal to Hammer, and Hammer were quite loyal to their people, I think. And so we will see some of these people turn up again in future weeks.
How does the film kind of differ to other sci-fi and alien horror films that were coming out of the States? So I've mentioned War of the Worlds, which is obviously a British story, but you've got the sort of big American adaptation, Day the Earth Stood Still, films like that. What were Hammer kind of doing differently with this film?
I think the big difference, the most immediate difference, is that it's not about communism. Most American science fiction films are in one way or another an allegory for communism. The Day the Earth Stood Still is an allegory for Jesus Christ, but that's, it's a different thing. But most of them were sort of, the whole Reds under the bed threat gripped America more than it did here, I think. And so this isn't about communism in any way, shape or form. What it is a very British worry, which sadly continues today, that sort of Johnny Foreigner is going to arrive on our shores and do awful things to us. We haven't got rid of that island mentality, sadly. So you see that in this, that this is plucky old England under threat. But the American films tended to be more allegorical about communism. As I said, they were becoming increasingly juvenile as the decade wore on.
Yeah, what do you mean by that, Kev?
The target audience was changing. But the earlier films, they were sort of aiming at a broad church. They were aiming for grown-ups as well as teenagers. As the teenager became a thing, particularly in America, science fiction films went chasing them. So, you get Invasion of the Eye Creatures and Attack of the whatevers, Attack of the 60-Foot Woman, God help us. But, they became much more aimed at teenagers and particularly teenage boys. And Hammer's science fiction films, because they'll continue to do these for a few more years, they remained very grown-up, very focused on an adult market.
There were a couple of kind of sci-fi moments that stuck out to me that I'd like to just mention. There's something kind of almost cosmic horror about the way that they talk about the rocket, where it's been, how it's come back. So we get this idea that it's been lost for a couple of months. And then there's a couple of lines. One, somebody says, it looks exactly the same, yet it's been who knows how far. And then later Quatermass is talking about Karun, and he says he's been to the uncharted wilderness of space and come back. And it almost had things, it almost brought things to mind for me, like Event Horizon.
Sure.
Or kind of like Lovecraftian, kind of going off into the absolute unknown reaches of space and seeing something unthinkable and kind of coming back with your mind unraveling. Where do you think sort of cosmic horror and possible sort of Lovecraftian influences kind of come into this film, or maybe into other works from Hammer? Well,
in this case, I think, the insignificance of humanity in the face of very indifferent alien forces. We never find out what this alien is. It gets aboard the ship somehow. I think they mention, I can't remember if it's in the film or the TV series, that it appears to come through the walls. It doesn't appear to have any physical entity. He just gets through the walls and then possesses.
I think you just kind of see it like on the film, don't you? Like the video that they're watching.
There's something, isn't there? There's on there, but you don't quite get to see what it is. Quatermass by the end has no idea where it came from or what it is. It's just this unknowable force that sort of come from the depths of space. And how Lovecraftian is that? That you've got this. The unknowable, that was one of his great tropes, wasn't it? And so you've got this creature that arrives and doesn't hate us, and he doesn't care about us. We're just food. It just needs us to survive and promulgate itself and all the rest of it. And that, I think, is the real sort of horror of this. In the greater scheme of things, we don't actually matter at all. As a species, I think we find that very difficult, because we're the top of the pyramid, top of the food chain, to then be confronted with a film like this which says we're totally insignificant. We're nothing to this alien. We're just something to plant its spores in. That's actually quite a scary prospect, and quite a Lovecraftian prospect, I think.
It really is, and you're right, this kind of idea that there's no There's no reasoning with it. There's no kind of sending an ambassador or doing a bit of diplomacy.
Sure.
It's just, like you say, I think somebody in the film says something about it kind of just wanting to like possess, consume and multiply or something, he says, which is really scary.
Although, curiously, the television programme had something a slightly different approach to that, because it ends... And we'll talk about this in a bit more depth again in a moment, but it ends with Quatermass persuading the 3 astronauts who are still inside this creature to kill themselves.
Oh, wow.
So that it stops the creature from sporing. So there is this idea that it can't be negotiated with, but the human beings can.
That is interesting.
And its downfall is that it doesn't understand that we're willing to do that. We're willing to make that sacrifice for the greater good.
Wow, yeah, that's really, really fascinating. So we'll come on to talk a little bit more about how the ending of the film kind of differed. The only other point that I wanted to bring up before we move on from the kind of specific sci-fi stuff is potentially, Kevin, my new favourite line uttered in any film I've ever seen, which is when they find the weird substance in the walls of the rocket.
Yes.
And the doctor takes it back to the lab and he does some tests, and then he's explaining it to Quatermass, and he says some fantastic invisible force converted 2 men into jelly. And I was like, this might be my new favourite film. I can't believe that with complete earnestness, this very serious doctor has just delivered that line with just such beautiful delivery. I thought it was remarkable stuff and I loved it.
It is a great line, isn't it? You know, they've been converted to jelly.
Converted 2 men into jelly. Loved it.
Yeah.
Especially like with the English accent as well. I don't know.
Oh, yes, of course. Exactly. It does, doesn't it? Yeah, I think we may be about to talk about him, our American friend in this film. If he'd said it would have sounded ludicrous.
That's so true.
But,
let's come on to talk about Brian Donlevy and his portrayal of Bernard Quatermass, or as he is called a couple of times in the film, Quatermass.
Quatermass. Yeah. Guys, if you're going to cast an American actor, at least get one that can say the name of the character properly. But, although, to be fair, if you listen to the surviving TV episodes, you get several pronunciations of Quatermass, and all the rest of it.
I mean, it doesn't really bother me because, you know, there are people... I mean, I'm always mispronouncing people's surnames. In fact, I might have even mispronounced Brian Donlevy's surname incorrectly, so...
Well, we're going to stick with Brian Donlevy, I think. Yes. Oh, dear, Brian Donlevy.
So what do we think of kind of Quatermass as a hero and how Brian Donlevy kind of portrays that man on screen?
Can you hear this noise? Can you hear that? That's me banging my head on the wall at the very thought of Brian Donlevy. Brian Donlevy, I don't mind Brian Donlevy when he's doing what he was good at, playing tough guys. Right. He was a lot of crime thrillers and westerns, and that was his forte. He was very good at that. As a British rocket scientist, he's less persuasive. There was a feeling in the 1950s in particular that American audiences wouldn't sit still for a British film if there was no American interest in it.
Right.
Hammer were about to change that quite dramatically when they released Curse of Frankenstein with not an American in sight, and it was a massive hit stateside. But at the time, that was the prevailing thought. And Robert Lippert, who is bankrolling the film from the States, he was the one who cast Brian Donlevy. He'd never been a big star. He'd done a few A roles, but mostly he was B character in films. He did actually get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor when he played Sergeant Markov in Beau Geste in 1939. So he actually had some skills. Yeah. He actually, but like I say, he's a rocket scientist. No. My friend and regular collaborator in commentary, Jonathan Rigby, writing in his book English Gothic, rather memorably said that he often looks like a walking, talking trench coat. And I think that's absolutely spot on because
that's very good.
He doesn't nail this character in the slightest bit. When you see Reginald Tate in the surviving TV episodes, and he's a very proper, very English scientist, I believe him immediately. First time he speaks, I think, oh yeah, rocket scientist. I buy that. Brian Donlevy, I once read a book, and forgive me the authors because I can't remember the title of it. It was about Jack the Ripper films. And they were talking about that TV series with Michael Caine from the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And they said it was the only time they'd seen a Ripper adaptation where they were actually living in fear for the Ripper. Because Michael Caine was so angry, they kept expecting him to rush out into the streets and just shout, "Oi, Ripper, no!" And I feel the same way with this version of Quatermass. I kind of get they changed the ending partly because I can't imagine Donlevy having a heartfelt conversation with the vestiges of these human beings trapped in this monster. He would have, if he'd got that close to them, he'd have just punched its lights out. He was a tough guy, sort of two-fisted tough guy character. And for me, it doesn't work. It's the only weak link in the whole film, I'm afraid. And Nigel Neal, I said he's a curmudgeon, but he's absolutely right. He said this about him: "I may have picked Quatermass's surname out of a phone book," which he did, incidentally. He just went through the phone book and found Quatermass. "But his first name was carefully chosen, Bernard, after Bernard Lovell, the creator of Jodrell Bank, pioneer, ultimate questing man. Donlevy played him as a mechanic, a creature with a completely closed mind." So he didn't like him at all. And I can kind of understand it. It's kind of, I don't know, it's an odd performance. It just doesn't ring true for me at all. And it rings true even less now that we've seen the television episodes and subsequent
You've seen
ones.
Sort of how
and of course,
it could be done.
We saw Andrew Keir later on in the brilliant Quatermass and the Pit, and he's so much better. But he's kind of, he is what he is. We're stuck with him, to be honest. As in my mind, I try to think what would it have been like if they'd kept some of the stuff from the TV series when they interrogate the child who encounters Caroon, who, like I said, is a little boy rather than a little girl. The little boy rather charmingly sneaks Caroon into a cinema to see a science fiction film. And a bit later on, he's being interviewed by Quatermass, and he's described in synopses as very gentle. I can't imagine Donlevy's Quatermass being gentle at all. You can just imagine him coming in, picking up the boy by the scruff of the neck and screaming into his face, "What did you see? Where is it?"
Yeah, absolutely. He comes across as callous at some points. There's a moment when he's talking about Caroon having come back, and he'll have the map and we must unlock his mind.
That's right. Yeah. Rather
than admitting him to hospital and maybe taking care of his needs, it's like, no, we need to get the information out of him. But I never got the impression that he wanted that, as you say, or as Nigel Neal said, this idea of him sort of being open-minded. It's not that I feel that he is on this quest for knowledge. It almost feels like it is just all ego with this portrayal. So it's all sort of, don't argue with me, or
that's right. Yeah.
Sort of ordering people about, or he's saying that there won't be a police investigation. And from the get-go, I'm just thinking, this guy is like a bad dude.
Yes, he's not at all likeable.
No.
We don't need to have likeable heroes. We don't really need to do that.
But he doesn't need to be likeable, but he seems like he might be pretty sketchy. Yeah. And I'm not sure that I meant to think that.
No, not so. There's no warmth to him at all. And I sometimes get the impression watching it that he's just trying to cover his arse.
Yeah.
He knows he's screwed up here. And rather than actually sort of help, he's just trying to cover his tracks. And I don't think that's what Neil was going for. I think he was looking for this intelligent scientist who wanted to learn, who wanted to know, hence him going and confronting the creature at the end of the TV series.
Right.
And it's like, you just don't get that at all from Donlevy at all. It's like, I don't know. It just doesn't work for me. He's the weakest link, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I agree with that, I think. There's an interesting line I just want to draw attention to before we move on from talking about Quatermass. But one of the policemen says, he's a weird one. It's like shaking hands with a piece of ice.
Yeah.
And I wondered kind of what you read from that line. Is that something that is more kind of about the coldness of like scientific pursuit, or it really stuck out to me that
I think that's sort of hangover from the TV series where he was a bit more aloof and he was a bit more cerebral. And there has been, and still is, I think, there still is this huge distrust of science and scientists. And I think there was, particularly then even more so, this idea that scientists were cold and unapproachable and operating on a very different level to us. And, I know a lot of scientists in real life, and they're quite charming people. They certainly wouldn't go around shouting at people like Bernard Quatermass does here. They're quite charming people, very sort of, quite nerdy sometimes, which I think is why I get on with them so well. But they are very calm and very thoughtful people. And I think sometimes that can appear a bit scary, a bit aloof, and a bit detached. And I think Quatermass could come across as that. And I think he probably should come across as slightly detached, because he is working on a level very unlike ours. Absolutely. If you think of people like even David Attenborough, who's lovely and cuddly, he knows so much that he's intimidating.
That's right.
And Stephen Hawking is, example. I'm a great admirer of Stephen Hawking. I absolutely adored his stuff, and Brian Cox. But you kind of think, if I was in a room with them, I'd be tongue-tied. I'd be like, you wouldn't want to say anything for fear of looking a fool.
What's your favourite cheese?
Yeah, what's your favourite colour, Brian Cox? And then you go into something about, it's ultraviolet mixed with a bit of infrared or something. But, because they are so clever. And I think that was what they were trying to get here, that it's the working class sort of bobbies meeting this what's supposed to be a sort of middle class scientist, and there's that little bit of a clash between the two, which I suspect comes across more in the TV series than it does in the film. But
I think you're right. I think it just doesn't necessarily come across on that intellectual level, and more of just like a level of kind of arrogance and almost aggression,
It does, yeah. It does. It's sad, but it's we're stuck with it. It's what we've got.
So what about Richard Wordsworth, Kev, as Victor Carroon? Because I thought that this performance was pretty amazing, actually. How do you find it?
Now you're talking.
Okay, good.
Now you're talking. Richard Wordsworth, predominantly a stage actor. He did do some films. He did a few more films for Hammer, Camp on Blood Island, Revenge of Frankenstein, Curse of the Werewolf. But he's predominantly a stage actor. That, by God, he's good.
Yeah.
He is stunning. In the TV series, Carroon spoke. He sometimes talked in German, which was the native tongue of the astronaut Reichenheim, who he'd absorbed.
So
he absorbed his memories as well.
Cool.
In the film version, we're told that when he's put into the ambulance, he says, "Help me."
That's right.
But we never hear him say anything. It's all done with mime and with facial expressions, and particularly those incredibly expressive eyes.
Yeah.
He manages to sell this idea that this is a man, a decent, intelligent human being, who's slowly being taken over by a force he can't really resist. Mm-hmm. And he's terrified, and he's doing everything he can not to hurt the people around him. It's extraordinary. Val Guest apparently told him, hold back just a mite of what you're feeling. That was his direction to him. So you can see that there's subtlety to it. It could have been so easy to go over the top and screaming and yelling and all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
And he doesn't. There's a chilling moment when he's been rescued by his wife and they're in the car, and he's just staring at her. Mm-hmm. And you can't tell if that's Carroon or if that's the alien.
That's right.
Is he looking at her because he's thinking, my God, I love this woman, she's rescued me, she's going to save me? Or is he thinking, lunch? You can't tell. And that's the beauty of this performance. It's nothing is said, and it's all done with body language. I would go as far to say, stick my neck on the block here, I think it's one of Hammer's best monster performances in any of their films.
I love that.
I think it's one of the best monster performances in any horror film.
Wow.
To be honest. I think he is incredible. I really do.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kev. He's absolutely captivating and genuinely terrifying.
Yeah.
That staring, he's got a look on his face that at times almost looks like he's smirking.
Yes.
But at the same time, almost as you're saying with that scene in the car, is it a smirk or is it a grimace? Is he in pain? Is he feeling mischievous? Is he, and you're right. You're constantly, or I found myself constantly flitting between, is this Karun or is it the alien?
Yeah, and you can't tell. You cannot tell.
Is it him fighting against the alien? Is it the alien trying to kind of force its way through to get more control? Like, it's just so good. And he's got that intensity. I think that the physical performance is so good as well. The way that he will just flex his hand to show discomfort, or he'll move it in a slightly different way to make it look like he is trying to hold himself back from hurting somebody.
That's right. Well, the scene with the chemist, I think. The alien is telling him.
My heart.
It's horrible, isn't it? The alien is saying, "Kill him! I need the food. I need the energy. Kill him! Kill him!" And you can see on his face he's trying so hard not to hurt this man. It's heartbreaking. Yeah, absolutely heartbreaking. We should be talking about Richard Wordsworth the way we talk about Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing in these films, but because he did so few films and television, particularly in genre, we don't. And it's so sad. I think this is an extraordinary performance.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do you think he might have been sort of pulling on some of the sort of thinking about Hammer and the films that they make going forwards and their sort of lean into the gothic? Do you pick up on anything kind of gothic in Wordsworth performance? Like maybe he's picking something up from those sort of more silent characters, Boris Karloff, Conrad Veidt, those sorts of actors who preceded him in horror.
It's a silent film performance, isn't it? Because he never says a word. And it is. I mean, Conrad Veidt and Boris Karloff are the two names that spring to mind whenever I see him. You can see the body language, the facial expressions. Yeah. It's all done with facial expressions. Yeah. And, obviously, this was a man who really knew his craft. He was a top stage actor. He would have known these guys, or known of them. And he would have drawn inspiration, I think, from, memories of having seen Karloff and memories of having seen Veidt. He would have, let's do that. They showed us how we could do it. I'm going to show you how we can do it a little bit better, maybe. Oh, there's a controversial one. I
daren't disagree nor agree with you, Kevin.
You coward.
I know, I am. I'm completely cowarding out of that one. I am. It's too early on.
To be honest, quite sensible. Don't leave us. Come back. I mean, honestly, I love these people as well. But honestly, I'm just so passionate about Richard Wordsworth's performance in this. And,
honestly, I can see why, because I think he is genuinely superb in this.
And he more than makes up, doesn't he, for the shortcomings of Don Levy. He's more, and indeed the rest. Look at the supporting cast in this film.
Right, I was just coming on to talk to you about the supporting cast.
Let's just look at them. We've mentioned him already. Jack Warner as Lomax. I'm not going to lie, and this probably won't be, if you know anything about me, this probably won't be the last time I utter this phrase during our podcasting together, Kevin, but I've got a bit of a crush on Chief Inspector Lomax. I could get that. He's lovely. He's a lovely character.
He's so lovely.
There's sort of the whole thing about his wife waiting at home for him and stuff like that. He's just an ordinary, salt of the earth, working class copper. Yeah. Who wants to go home to his missus. Doesn't want it to have anything to do with this alien nonsense if he can help it. He just wants to go back to the quiet life. And he is brilliant in this. And he was only a few years away from becoming Dixon of Dock Green, that very long-running police show, which is where he became a household name. He'd been demoted, obviously. He was just a body on the beat by the time he gets to Dixon.
He's back in uniform,
He's back in uniform at that point. But as Lomax, I think Lomax is really the sort of the heart and soul of the film.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's the character we all associate with, because he's largely baffled by what's going on throughout the film.
But at the same time, he's absolutely dogged, isn't he? He won't let Quatermass intimidate him. There's a couple of really nice moments where he will, because as we've sort of already said, like Quatermass is all sort of aggression and you know, trench coat, and Lomax he has this much more kind of quiet authority. And there's a really lovely moment where he says something to Quatermass like, well, please sit down because it's going to be rude if I'm towering. No, what is it? Please sit down because it's going to be rude if you're towering over me and I need to sit down.
I really need to sit down.
And it's this lovely sort of way of, he's much more gentle, but he's still getting his way about him. And I was like, yes, yes, Lomax.
I think if I went into a London pub and Quatermass was sitting there, I'd go to another pub. If Lomax was sitting there, I'd go straight over to Lomax and we'd have a hell of a night out.
Absolutely, buy him a pint.
Buy him a pint, because he just seems like such a lovely character. And a lot of that is absolutely down to Jack Warner.
Yeah.
He's just absolutely stunning. But you've got other great actors. There's David King Wood as Briscoe, the doctor you were mentioning earlier. Absolutely terrific.
He's great.
And then Thora Hird turns up as the drunken Rosie, who thinks that the creepy Crawley that she saw was another of her gin goblins.
God.
She's hilarious. All me legs, and she faints.
That's Thora Hird.
That's Thora Hird, yeah. Terrific.
I did not realise, but I have on my notes to speak to you about Rosie because she's my absolute favourite. I thought she was incredible. The way that she's kind of stumbling over all of her words, it takes a really good actor or actress to play drunk well, and she is so good. Like,
it's
she's
a brilliant bit of drunk acting.
She's hamming it up like just enough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the way that she stumbles over her words is so organic and it's beautiful. And there are these wonderful moments where, she's talking about the creepy Crawley up on a wall, and she says something like, "It wasn't like any of the things I normally see on a Saturday night."
Yeah, and then the cop, who's played by the great Sam Kidd, another brilliant actor in this, says, "Oh no, this time you really did see it, Rosie."
I know.
And he's like, and that's when she goes, "Oh, me legs," and she faints.
"Not a gin goblin."
Not a gin goblin. It's lovely. I mean, it's there. She's got 2 minutes at the most, and she completely steals the show.
I completely agree. I thought she was amazing. I did not realise that was Thora Hird as well. I love it.
She's brilliant. She's so wonderful. She's up against people like Lionel Jeffries, for God's sake, as Blake, the great Lionel Jeffries. Gordon Jackson turns up at the end as a BBC TV producer. Now, curiously, he played a very similar role in the TV series.
Oh.
He's the only one, I think, to move over from the TV series.
That's interesting.
Basil Dignam's there, as Maurice Kaufman, Bartlett Mullins, Marianne Stone, Toke Townley as the chemist. Loads of people you'll recognise if you've seen enough British films from the 50s and 60s. It's a cast to die for, it really is. And they're all firing on all cylinders.
The character I really wanted to draw attention to as just like a very much kind of a bit part, really, but for some reason just jumped off the screen at me, was the private investigator. Yeah. That Judith, Caroon's wife, hires to get him out of the hospital.
Sure.
And is he played by somebody famous? Who's this, Kev?
Yes. The private investigator is Harold Lang, who is another really, really well-known face.
Is he? I knew that I recognised him. And like I say, this character, for some reason, just really jumped out at me. There's something about the way that he delivers his lines. At one point, he says something like, calm down, the building's shaking, or something like that. And he's got this very sort of like a little bit kind of wide boy energy to him.
That's right, yeah.
But there's something in this section of the film that is essentially like, it's kind of a heist, right? He needs to kind of sneak into this hospital and basically steal Caroon out.
He's got that kind of slight East End accent. He's more pronounced in his other performances, but he's slightly sort of Cockney, slightly sort of, he could have been running with the Craze earlier that afternoon, and now he's come to do this. Yeah.
But then when he gets onto the, it's not really a ward, when he gets into Caroon's room and then talks to the other nurse, he kind of smartens his accent up a bit.
He does.
I don't know what it was about this guy, Kev, but I just thought he was such an injection of energy at this part of the film. I thought he was perfect.
And it's another one of those performances that's really subtle. Like you said, the changing of the accent slightly.
Yeah.
And he sort of switches backwards and forwards between being slightly shifty and a little bit too friendly.
Right, yeah.
You know those people you meet sometimes, they're a bit in your face. You'd be, "Oh, hello, mate," all that sort of thing. He goes from that to being very slightly shifty.
Yeah.
and back again,
Yeah.
almost turning on a sixpence. Really, really good performance. The whole film is full of them, except for one. And
There's also a nice bit in that scene where the nurse who would come back and catch him in the act gets distracted by the two female nurses.
That's right,
and decides that he wants to take them both out for Chinese food, which I thought was fantastic.
And, 1955 probably seemed terribly exotic, Chinese food.
Well, and he says something like, the Chinese restaurants open till midnight. I was like, we should be so lucky nowadays.
I know. we think we've progressed so far. We've lost so much.
Honestly,
really
this used to be a proper country, Kev.
It did. It's a proper country.
Chinese restaurants open till 12. That's what I want.
You could get a Chinese meal at half past 11. You got proper coppers and alien invaders. Proper country. Yes.
So let's talk a bit about the actual horror. So obviously Hammer horror, sci-fi horror, very much so. And so what we get a lot here is kind of body horror, transformations, monster effects. How do you think that the kind of monster makeup and the body horror elements hold up now?
I think they hold up really well, to be honest.
I do too.
Yeah. Part of it is down to Wordsworth, again, selling the illusion of this, but also Phil Leakey's makeup is extraordinary. He really was an absolute master of this sort of thing. We're going to see, like I say, we're going to see that in full effect in The Curse of Frankenstein in a few weeks' time, where, he really does go to town with that makeup. But, this idea of us being infiltrated by a force that we can't control, our bodies have been penetrated and taken over. You're going to see it in Alien in 1979, so the effect is still there, and I think the monster at the end, yes, it might leave a little bit to be desired, but for 1955, that was pretty bloody good, to be honest. I think if you were watching it on a Saturday night in 1955, you'd have thought, oh my God, it's an alien monster.
Right.
We've been spoiled by, sort of incredible practical effects and usually quite dodgy CGI effects. But back then, I don't think British cinema had ever done anything quite like that.
In my head, as I was watching it, and I was thinking about the effects and the makeup, I've almost kind of split it into two different things. So there's the body horror stuff, which I think works really well. So whether that is the kind of skin on Karun's face or the kind of veins down his arm, the actual transformation of his arm into the sort of weird like cactus hybrid, I think are all superb. And I think also when he has sucked the life force out of bodies, I think they look really good. Oh,
those desiccated, but that bit in the zoo freaks me out every time.
Yeah,
no, I'm a bit of an animal lover, and I don't like that bit.
No, so do leave the leopards alone. Come on.
I know. It's like, no. So those desiccated bodies are really good. There's something very creepy about him having sort of subsumed a cactus for some reason.
There is.
I don't know why, but that bothers me.
Yeah.
That he's managed to take on the characteristics of a cactus. And I think it's Briscoe, isn't it, that says something like he's becoming a hybrid of animal and plants.
That's right.
And it's this sort of thing that shouldn't exist anywhere in nature, but it's becoming that, and we can't stop it, and it's just, the makeup effects are wonderful. They allow just enough room for Wordsworth to sell the pain and the agony.
Absolutely.
Although, interestingly, he vanishes from the story at a very interesting point. There's a little girl that we need to talk about, played by Jane Asher, in a scene that I think is definitely a tip of the hat to Frankenstein.
Right, I wanted to ask you about this, Kev. Good.
Well, here we go.
Because so did I.
And, people in 1955 will have remembered seeing Frankenstein. It'll have been reissued several times. They'll have remembered seeing it, and they will remember, even in the British cut version, there's something nasty happens to the little girl. And so they're playing with our expectations here. Like I say, a little boy in the TV series, but no, we've got a very, very young Jane Asher playing this little girl. It's got to be a conscious thing. Like, they know Frankenstein. Let's freak them out a little bit. But what's interesting about that scene more than anything else is Karun again wrests back control of his body just at the last minute and runs away. We never see him as Karun again. That's the last time we see him vaguely human. The next time we see him at the zoo, he's just like a slithering tentacle thing dragged across frame.
Interestingly, there is one other moment that we see him, but he's like a kind of in-between stage.
Yeah.
So you don't really see him as
a human,
Carroon or as Wordsworth.
Exactly.
He's just kind of behind the bushes, and you see his eyes, but they look like, I don't know, like it's kind of really taken over his face.
Oh,
by
yeah,
that
yeah.
point.
He's
and
gone.
it's just this tease, isn't it? It's horrible.
He's gone at that point.
Yeah, he's
and
gone,
so,
you're right.
As a humanoid, as something that's vaguely like the man he was, his last act is to spare the life of a child.
Oh.
Now, doesn't that speak volumes about Carroon?
It really does.
So he would run away and he would just... I think at that point he's kind of resigned to the fact that this is what's going to happen. Then we see him in that bush, or partly see him in the bush, when he's not really Carroon anymore.
No, exactly.
He's gone at that point, and that's so heartbreaking. You know, just that little bit, and see that sort of thing that slithers across the floor, like a tail or a tentacle or something. You think,
Yeah.
oh God, that's what he's become.
Oh, I know.
You
and
know,
he's leaving snail trails wherever he goes.
That's right, yeah. And he's just, it's so awful. But again, you know, just the brilliance of the film, isn't it? The brilliance of Nigel Neal. It makes you care about this man who's become a monster. Yeah.
And which is again absolute testament to Wordsworth's,
of course,
performance, because actually you don't know anything about Cahoon at all.
You don't. You know that he's married.
Yeah, you know that he's married.
Astronaut.
You know that he's an astronaut, and that is literally it.
And that's it. And you end up heartbroken for the man.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is down to the writing and to the performance.
And to the performance, absolutely right. Yeah, you're spot on with that. Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
But you're right about the bit with the girl, and I felt, because you're right, they're playing with our expectations.
Yeah.
So as he comes out of because he's been sleeping in the boat.
That's
she's
right.
Playing, she's having a tea party with her doll.
Yeah.
And he comes out, and my stomach dropped. I was like, oh no, we know what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't happen, and you're right, he wrests back control and he kind of flees, essentially. Yeah. I had like a palpable relief.
Yes, definitely.
You know,
yeah.
And not just for her, but for him.
For him, yeah, because you wouldn't have wanted his last days or minutes on Earth knowing that he killed a child.
No, I know.
Because we have come to care about him enough, even though we don't know much about him, we've come to care about his predicament so much that we wouldn't want him to go to his death thinking, I killed a child. Brilliant bit of writing, brilliant bit of direction, superb performance, really, really something special.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So obviously he's turned into whatever he is, a big sort of alien squid cactus hybrid.
Yep.
And he finds his way to Westminster Abbey.
Yes.
And this is where we get the kind of denouement of the film. So, Kev, how do you find the final act of the film and how it pulls everything together? And should we talk a little bit about how that differs to like the original story?
Well, it's just occurred to me, literally, as you were talking there, it just occurred to me, you were saying earlier about sort of, you know, they're all either in the pub or down the church. And Carroon finds his way back to the biggest church of them all in England. I'd never thought of that before. And I don't know whether there's some kind of significance to that or not. I'd need to look into that. But he does. He makes his final stand, as it were. Yeah. What's left of him in a church.
Well, in the church, right?
The church, absolutely the church, you know. So I'd never thought of that before. I wish I'd thought of that sooner. We may come back to that later. So somebody, we will almost certainly be doing some sort of mailbag episode. Someone write this down. Write an email to us saying, Kev, can you explain what you meant? And I can go into further detail.
I'll write an email pretending to be a listener.
So I can have a good think about that. That's a good excuse to watch it again. But yes, this is very different, as I said, to the TV version. The TV version, Quatermass appeals to the vestiges of the three crewmen. In the TV version, the monster has actually not just absorbed them physically, but he's taken their memories and their emotions as well. And Neil sort of bemoaned the fact that the film version didn't do that it just absorbed them physically. But in the TV version, it's sort of taken on their memories, their feelings, their human characteristics. And there's just enough of them left for Quatermass to appeal to them and say, look, you know, you're going to have to sacrifice yourselves for the good of the whole planet. And because they're the men they are, they do it willingly. And it kills the monster that way. Film needed a bit more, I know, something a bit more cinematic, obviously. And it also, like I said, I don't think this version of Bernard Quatermass was capable of talking anybody into or out of anything. He'd have just gone up and punched it in that one eye that it's got, you know?
Yeah, and even if the performance was there, even if the writing was there in terms of them being able to kind of convincingly get it on camera, I think the whiplash for the audience of, wait a minute, when did this bloke grow a heart, would have just been too much.
Exactly.
Wouldn't it?
And, you know, the fact that, you know, in this version it ends with him walking away. Basically, you know, the TV Quatermass appeals to the emotions of the last vestiges of humanity. This version electrocutes it, which probably, I think, sums him up. But then as soon as he's done that, he just walks off without a care, and he's going to do it again. The last thing we see is the launch of Quatermass 2, the second rocket. Like, he's learned nothing.
It's so bleak, Kev.
Yeah. It's like, mate, have you not learned anything here?
Literally nothing.
Yeah.
I am not exaggerating. I gasped out loud when he said, I'm going to need some help. I'm going to start again. I was like, oh!
I mean, have a couple of months off, Bernard. You know, go away and have a think about what's happened.
It literally looks like he's walking back to his lab in that moment.
It does, yeah. And it's like, have some compassion for all those people whose lives have been lost. It's not his fault. You know, it's not his fault this alien got in the ship, but he has to take some responsibility. And he needs to, like I say, just go and have a couple of months in the country, just having to think about what
Touch
he's doing.
some grass, Quatermass.
Touch some grass, Bernard, come on, you know. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of miss that ending. They tried it again in the remake. Talk a bit more about the remake in a minute if I can. I kind of miss that more cerebral approach to an ending, but it's a film. It needed something big. It needed a big bang to go out on. And in that respect, I think it works well enough. It's a more traditional ending. It
is.
But it works.
It does work. Works. I really loved, like, genuinely relished all of the stuff about it being a BBC programme that they're filming, so the restoration of Westminster Abbey. There's a brilliant bit where they find a body and the BBC presenter is like, They sort of say something like, should we stop filming? And he says something like, no, I'm all right. Let's just carry on in another part of the Abbey. It's like...
And of course, that may be a little in-joke about the fact that the original Quatermass TV series went out live.
Oh.
And so it was a live performance, which is why we don't have the episodes. They stuck a film camera against a monitor to record the first two episodes, and then thought, that'll do. That's a representative sample. We don't need any more.
Yeah, what about us?
But it went out live. So, what about us? Yeah, what about your kids and your grandkids, for God's sake? We want to see this stuff. But... yeah, so it might have been a little tip of the hat to the fact that it was a live BBC
That's amazing.
Broadcast. And there was, I think this came a bit later, but rather curiously, there was a little episode that did reflect that moment of the guy that you found dead on camera. There was a science fiction play called, I think it was called Underworld. And it was about the after effects of a nuclear war. People are sort of underground. I think that's what it's called, because they're in the underground system, sheltering in there. And it went out live... and one of the actors died during the broadcast. And the production manager was an enterprising young woman by the name of Verity Lambert, who some of us know as the first producer of Doctor Who. She became one of the most powerful women in British television, and she impressed everybody by keeping that thing going, by helping to rewrite scripts get them through this live performance. That came later, but there was this sort of weird echo to that scene in the Quatermass Experiment. Yeah. But, I think it probably was a little nod towards the fact that British television at the time was largely broadcast live.
That's amazing. I was saying earlier about how with the effects and the makeup, I kind of I'd had to separate them into two prongs.
Sure.
The first being very good, the kind of body horror and the makeup kind of on people, and the other prong, which is the monster itself or the monsters. There was, I mean, I watched this on an incredible transfer in the new Hammer box set, kindly lent to me by producer Mike. like. And I'm sure when they were making it, at no point did they think that it was going to be at that sort of high resolution.
Oh, of course not.
And people were going to be watching it this many times, etc. But boy, do I love seeing a string. And you can see the string as they pull the little octopus towards the camera when it's creeping across the floor of the lab. And I saw it and I clapped my hands in glee, Kev. I loved it.
But you know what? I am the generation that grew up watching Thunderbirds. I'm used to seeing strings of wires. They don't bother me the slightest bit. I got through. And the television version of it is actually a hand puppet.
Oh.
It's got like fingers poking through, and some of the fingers at certain points are actually Nigel Neal.
Oh my God, I love that.
He's behind it.
This is amazing.
Wiggling his fingers about, doing the tentacles, which is fantastic, isn't it? It's, there are worse monsters from 1950s science fiction films. Trust me, there are a lot worse.
Yeah, it's not terrible. And there's a way that they're sort of, they seem to be maybe using some kind of live animal footage. Like, is there an octopus or something that's used in the close-ups?
It looks like it, doesn't it? It's something a bit more organic and squirmy. Yeah.
But no, he gets shot with as much electricity as they possibly can. So
indeed,
they kind of put they draw all of the power. Yeah, and you get these sort of shots of businesses and homes kind of going dark, and I couldn't help thinking, that was some sort of reference or kind of callback to, the blackouts and stuff during the war.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure that would have been very fresh in people's minds.
Yes.
It's only 10 years after the end of the war, so yeah, of course, people absolutely remember that.
And I loved that they're sort of on the radio or on the phone, they say, "Hello, Battersea, stand by," and I'm like, oh my God, Battersea Power Station.
Yeah.
I love the idea that there's somebody in Battersea just flicking the switch off.
Exactly, yeah. It's not just the cover of a Pink Floyd album, guys. It was actually a proper power station at one time. But yes. But, I do regret the ending changing, I must confess. It's one of the two things that I wish they'd kept. And the other thing I wish they'd kept is actually a line of dialogue that I think you would like. It's very early on, first or second episode, because I've seen it recently. It exists. Judith is talking to someone, and she said that the last thing she said to Victor before he set sail for the stars was, "Bring something back." And of course he does. And she gets what she wanted. And it's tragic, isn't it? It's heartbreaking.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it brings something back.
What was she expecting? Like an Eiffel Tower keyring or something?
I think she was just being a bit cute and a bit sort of like...
I know.
And then, oh, no, be careful what you wish for. He did bring something back.
Goodness.
And look what he's done to him. Look what he's done to you. It's like, oh, tragic. But what a great line. Bring something back.
That's an incredible line.
Yeah.
I agree. I would have liked to have seen that in the film as well. That's amazing. Any other sort of highlights or moments that we haven't touched on, Kev?
We should probably touch on the fact that there was this BBC TV remake.
Yeah.
2005, if only because it allows me to do yet another Doctor Who reference. They did a series of programmes called TV on Trial, where they were looking at some big moments in BBC history. And of course, the Quatermass Experiment was a big moment. And they did like an hour and a half, 2 hour version, which was broadcast live. They did it live like the original.
Amazing.
And Jason Fleming plays Quatermass.
Yeah.
I like Jason Fleming, but
I think
he was slightly miscast in this, but he's a lot better than old Brian, that's for sure. But there is a lovely moment, and I do like this story, so I'm going to share it. Some people would already know where I'm going. That one of the characters, Briscoe, is played by a then relatively little-known actor by the name of David Tennant.
Oh.
And during rehearsals, David Tennant got a message from his agent saying, "Well done, you're the new Doctor." And so he told everybody. Now, when Quatermass meets Briscoe in the broadcast thing that went out, when they were doing rehearsals, they stuck with the original line, "Nice to see you again, Gordon." He changed the line in the broadcast version to "Nice to see you again, Doctor."
Oh my God.
And there's a little twitch around David Tennant's mouth, like he's trying to hold back a smile. Like, "You've just announced me and no one will get it. No one will understand this at all for a few more weeks." But he actually kind of deliberately gave away that he was going to be the new Doctor, and none of us noticed it because we didn't have the context.
That is so cool.
Isn't that terrific?
Yeah.
I've been waiting this whole episode just to tell that story. I mean, the rest of it, I'm just not interested. I just wanted to tell that story because it's so cool.
It's like, come on, Becky, rattle through all this stuff.
Yeah, come on, get through all this stuff.
I've got something to say.
I've got a really good story at the end.
That is a really good story.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I like it.
I love that so much. So what was the kind of commercial / critical reaction to the Quatermass Experiment when it came out?
It was generally good. The critics were a bit mixed, but generally they quite liked it. Of course, Hammer were going to get used to critics being revolting to them in the next few years. But, some were baffled, which is par for the course, but there were a lot of good notices. Today's Cinema called it one of the best essays in science fiction to date. Paul Dane in the News Chronicle said this is the best and nastiest horror film I've seen since the war.
Oh, wow.
Wow, which is good, isn't it? The New Statesman, they said it was better than either War of the Worlds or Them. And, they had a few things to say about dear old Brian and other people. Dilys Powell of the Sunday Times called it exciting but distinctly nauseating, which, frankly, if I'd read that, I'd have been first in the queue.
I was literally about to say, Kevin, I'm not sure that's a criticism.
It's not, is it? That should have been on the posters.
Not for weirdos like us.
Exactly. That's like, come and see us,
Yeah.
But we've also got a very nice, well, not it's negative, but it's the fact that it's the person saying it. No less than Francois Truffaut. He was still a critic at the time, before he became one of France's most famous directors. And he was writing for Cahiers du Cinéma magazine, and he said, this one is very, very bad. Far from the small pleasures we get, for example, from the innocent science fiction film signed by the American Jack Arnold. The subject could have been turned into a good film, not lacking in spice, with a bit of imagination. None of this is in this sadly English film.
Hey!
Come on, Francois, you're a brilliant film director, but seriously, you're way off the mark here.
Way off the mark.
I think that the last line there, none of this is in this sadly English film.
Yeah.
Coming from a French critic.
Come on.
I wonder if there was a little bit of, little bit of sort of antagonism going on there. But luckily, the public ignored those kind of notices, and the film did very well at the London box office. It was, I think it caught Hammer a bit by surprise, to be honest. It was such a hit.
And I know that we'll come on to talk about this in a couple of weeks, but just to quickly touch on this, how quickly did they start thinking about making a sequel?
Almost straight away. In fact, we'll talk about it next week, because next week's film, X the Unknown, is Quatermass in all but name.
Okay.
They wanted to use Quatermass in it, but Nigel Neal said, no, you're not doing that. Absolutely not. So they made a film which is a kind of faux Quatermass. It's Quatermass in all but name. And then, they go straight into Quatermass and Quatermass 2 after that. It took them a little while to get round to Quatermass and the Pit. But I think, I was thinking this the other night, of all the series of films that Hammer made, and admittedly there's only 3 of them here, I think this is the best series that they did. The Dracula series got some brilliant films. They've also got some less than brilliant films. Same with the Frankenstein series. Some amazing films, some not quite so good. I think all 3 of the Quatermasses are absolutely brilliant.
Right, so they've sort of got that consistency.
There's something almost like you couldn't mess up Quatermass. It was too good of an idea.
I love that.
To get wrong.
So I think I probably know the answer to this, Kevin, but where does the Quatermass Experiment rank for you, kind of compared to the other Hammer films? Now, we're both going to do this, and so obviously this is going to be a sort of relative thing, because I've only seen a handful of them. You've seen all of them. But for you, are we talking like upper, middle, or lower? I doubt it's going to be lower.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I'd say there were 4 levels: lower, middle, upper, and elite.
Ooh, okay.
And then the elite ones, which are absolutely the best ever. This just misses out from getting into the elite because of dear old Brian.
Sure.
He lets the side down, but he's definitely the upper echelons of Hammer horror. If you're new to Hammer horror, and I'm hoping that an awful lot of people are going to come to this podcast not having seen them before, and are going to join us on this journey through them.
I hope so.
This is as good a place to start as any. It's extraordinary to see them leaping in feet first with a subject that British cinema only occasionally sort of flirted with, and do it so brilliantly that it virtually redefined who they were.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Obviously, as I've said, I've seen far fewer than you have.
That'll change.
It will, I know. Week on week, in fact. It's absolutely upper for me, I think. But before I saw the Quatermass Experiment, Plague of the Zombies was my favourite. But for me, in terms of just general enjoyment, and again, coming back to what you said right at the top of the episode about it just being so absorbing. And
I mean, how ironic that this is a film about people being absorbed, and it's one of the most absorbing films of the 1950s. How ironic is that?
And if I may, it got under my skin, Kev.
Yeah, very good. I see what you did there. But it does, doesn't it? It does. It gets under your skin.
It does.
It's emotional as well as scary.
And also just like pretty damn entertaining. Like, I had such a good time with it. So
I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased.
Well, yeah, not only for the reason that it means that this relationship of ours, this podcast relationship, will go on at least another week.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll go on for several months before we have our first falling out. But I'm looking forward to that moment.
Yeah, me too. So, thank you for listening to Hammer Time. We'll be back next week with Hammer's second sci-fi horror film, X the Unknown, from 1956. To check out the full list of movies we'll be covering throughout this podcast, head to evolutionofhorror.com/hammer. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us questions or comments for upcoming mailbag episodes. Drop us an email to hammer@evolutionofhorror.com. You can follow the Evolution of Horror Network on Instagram at EOH_network. You can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky at Bunny Darke. And Kev, where can people find you and your work?
EOFFTV. If you just search for that, you'll find my main website, eofftv.com. You'll find my review site. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on various others, but I don't use them so much. But you can find me. I'm out there. It's all under EOFFTV, so come and say hello. You'll find one of us in the church and one of us in the pub, and we'll leave it to you to decide which one is which. Oh, no, sod that. I'm going down the pub. Oh, OK, I'll see you there. Don't forget to rate and review us on your podcast app of choice. Thank you for listening. Join us next week for another episode of Hammer Time.